The village. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Matthew 9:35. Reconstructed village scene. Villages always sought well-protected locations, especially before the Pax Romana, which came with the ascension of Augustus to power in 27 CE, provided a sense of security to the countryside. People shied away from open areas in the plains, choosing slopes with a good view of the road and a not too distant water source. According to Josephus, Life 45-235, there were 240 villages scattered throughout Galilee. The average area of a village might be no more than a few acres, with a population of a few hundred souls. Larger villages, called towns by Josephus, might comprise some 10 acres and were often walled. In one such community, Nain, Jesus meets a funeral procession at the gate and raises a widow's son from the dead. Luke 7:11. On the outskirts of the village was the market, where inhabitants could purchase the few commodities they did not manufacture themselves. Just beyond it were workshops of the tanner and the potter, situated where the smells created during manufacture would waft away on the prevailing eastern wind. Now, as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Reads Mark 1:29. Let us imagine Jesus and the disciples walking through streets like those depicted in the drawing on the previous page. They would have walked along unpaved alleyways, often no wider than the width of a camel laden on either side with bales of flax. Courtyards closed in by plastered stone walls, some 10 feet high on either side, gave privacy to their inhabitants. No one standing at a window could have announced the arrival of Jesus, for these windows were situated high in the walls and were quite small, designed only to admit light and air. As the group progressed, they may have greeted the occasional shopkeeper, perhaps a vendor of knives or rope, or a butcher, whose doorways, unlike those of the homes, faced the street. Precariously perched on a promontory surrounded on all sides by steep ravines, the location of the town of Gamla is an example of its inhabitants' search for a protected site. A hand mill for grinding grain. Villagers of the Holy Land in Jesus' day, like agrarian societies today, used and reused their tools even when broken or impaired, as demonstrated by the following commentary regarding the laws of ritual purity as they applied to implements used in daily life. The size of what remains of them must be in every case such that they can do their wonted work. If a shovel has lost its blade, it still remains susceptible to ritual impurity because it is become like a hammer. Mishnah Kelim 12:2-3. Numerous containers of various sizes and shapes were part of every household's possessions. A plow. Implements used in everyday village life have changed little over thousands of years. This iron-studded sledge was used for threshing. Sometimes a child sat astride it to give it added weight. A comb rake. A shovel. A broom rake. A village house. They entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Mark 1:29. We can imagine that the house of Peter's mother-in-law in Capernaum looked much like the house in the drawing at right. Arriving at the house, Jesus and the disciples would pass through the courtyard, encountering members of the household busy at their daily tasks, weaving, caring for the farm animals, grinding corn or baking bread. Perhaps they dodged children at play as they stepped over the high threshold. Pulling aside the curtain hanging over the door, they entered the house. Pausing momentarily while their eyes adjusted to the dimness within, they then made for the bedroom in which they could see, by the flickering light of a small oil lamp, the form of Peter's mother-in-law lying motionless on a pallet. Model of houses in Capernaum from Jesus' day. So he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she served them. Now at evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Mark 1:31-33. Restored ovens from ancient Katsarin. Life on the rooftop. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Luke 17:31. Due to the mild climate of the land of Israel, much of daily life would be conducted outdoors, either in the courtyards or on the roof. Roofs of simple homes were constructed in 3 layers. The first was wooden beams, often cypress and sometimes cedar. On top of the beams, straw mats were laid, and on top of these, a layer of clay. The clay would be packed down tight before the first winter rains with the use of a stone roller. This type of roof would have to be broken through, Mark 2:4, by chopping a hole as in the following story. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. Luke's version of the same story, Luke 5:19, has the man let down through the tilling. In the village setting, tiled roofs were less common. Luke is believed to have been a native of Antioch in Syria, and his choice of words probably reflects his city background. Seeking desert solitude. Caves in Qumran in the Judean desert in which seekers of solitude may have lived. In those days John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Matthew 3:1-2. Seeking out the purity of the desert as a path to spiritual renewal was a well-known phenomenon in Judaism. It was part of a long tradition going back to the days of Moses and Elijah, both of whom sought out the rigors of the desert. John the Baptist preached his message from the wilderness, and Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, Matthew 4:1, while fasting for 40 days. In time, Christian monks would go to the desert in an effort to emulate this lifestyle and that of Jesus and John the Baptist. In Second Temple times, many Jews, not necessarily sectarians, left home and family for varying periods of time to experience desert solitude or to seek out a valued leader. Josephus, as a part of his education, spent 3 years in the wilderness learning at the feet of a teacher whose name was Banus, and used no other clothing than grew upon trees, and had no other food than what grew of its own accord, and bathed himself in cold water frequently, both night and by day, in order to preserve his chastity. Life of Josephus 1:11. In Luke 7:24-25, Jesus makes note of this drift to the wilderness in connection with the ministry of John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who are gorgeously apparelled and live in luxury are in kings' courts. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. A teacher preaches in his cave classroom in the desert. His student body would have changed weekly or monthly as some disciples returned to their daily lives with new pupils taking their place at his feet.